talking about We Are All African 20 years later. So why don't you kind of fill everybody in on what exactly the controversy was?
Right. So in 2005, I'm teaching a course at a Southern Ontario University, critical thinking course, 93 students. Everything's going well. It had occurred to me with the research that I had done at Harvard earlier in the 2000s, it seemed pretty obvious that the evidence was overwhelming for human origins, that the descent came from Africa. I mean, it was overwhelming. Spencer Wells was doing work with the Genographic Project with National Geographic, and he was taking swabs of hundreds of thousands of people around the world and checking out their DNA and finding basically everything led back to Africa. So for the first time we had genetic evidence. I bought one of these kits and we used it on Matt, my youngest son, and it showed our haplotype descendancy went from Africa and pretty much ended in Italy. And you don't tell them your name or anything, you just say male, what age you are. So the evidence seemed to me, to be overwhelming. The fossil evidence, the anthropological evidence, the developmental evidence, the patterns, everything was there. And so it occurred to me, all humans descended from common ancestors from the African continent. Darwin predicted this, and now we had overwhelming evidence. And as a professor teaching critical thinking, I felt obligated to write something on the board to get the students interested, to get them talking, to get them motivated. And those 4 words were, we are all African. Not Africans, that seems to be of the present tense, but African meaning that's where we all came from. And when I did that, a student put up their hand and said, yeah, but how do you know that? Which is a great question. So I said, well, all of the evidence, points in that direction. And the way in which science works is you follow the evidence wherever it leads. And where it has led my colleagues and I is to the conclusion that everybody, when you look around the room here and you see all your different features, different skin colors and tonalities, all of that coalesces back in Africa 40, 50, 60, 100, 200,000 years ago. That means we're all related. That means we're all kind of like cousins. And I found this was a really important message that no other professors were teaching, because in a single sentence with 4 words, it cuts across all racial boundaries and all human claims for privilege and status. And it made everybody equal in 4 words. And so I thought these were very, very powerful words. So I wrote them on the board and I said, if evolutionary theory is correct, and I believe it is the best account for how we've gotten here, then it follows that we all have to have descended out of Africa. And so the student was indigenous, and said, but my people...
Indigenous, like Canadian?
Canadian, yeah. Brantford area, 6 Nations. And yeah, she said, my people wouldn't accept that. And I said, I get that, right? I get it. There's a lot of different Indian mythologies and spiritual beliefs about how their ancestors arrived, the turtle's back and the sky woman. There's a lot of different ways in which indigenous peoples believed to have originated. But then she said, who's right? And as a professor, I couldn't just say, well, that's not important, or, well, that doesn't even matter, or you're speaking your truth and I'm speaking my truth, which is meaningless to me as an analytic philosopher. So I said, not your people, but how do we have this conversation, right? How do we do this? So I said, can you invite some elders into the classroom, and I'll invite some scientific colleagues of mine, and we'll discuss how we have this debate, how we have this conversation when we have these so-called culture clashes between science and spirituality. And the class erupted in applause. Everybody was keen on this. They were looking forward to this. But I didn't hear back from the student. And I was up for a tenure track position. One had been created for critical thinking. And I had to be shortlisted. I had to be interviewed because of my seniority at this university. So it was looking pretty good. I had actually met with the VP, and she had shown me the job description. And I thought, wow, this is wonderful. About 10 days later, I got a registered letter in the mail, opened it up, and it was from the dean, associate dean of the university, saying basically that particular Indigenous student and 2 fundamentalist Christian students in the class got together and wrote letters and accused me of being racist and Eurocentric, which I didn't get. They basically said I was being racist by foisting my ideas of what equality actually meant by claiming we were all African, and I was Eurocentric because I was using science to prove my point. And this was 2005 that this was occurring. So what had happened was no elders were coming into the class and no discussions were forthcoming. And what had happened was the position was retracted. It just sort of went away.
Like the whole position was...
The position for critical thinking professor, gone. Just gone. Not only that, but...
So it wasn't another person given the job?
No.
The whole course and everything?
Everything. Just, yeah. So you don't get fired by universities. Mm-hmm. You get edged out. You know what I mean? You get nudged out the door.
Because you didn't have tenure.
Mm-mm.
So this was... How long had you been working for them?
Well, yeah, so this was 2005, so I'd been working for them for at least, 6-7 years.
Right, okay.
Teaching courses, doing what's called the sessional gig, where you get paid per course. Yep. So you're teaching at 3 different universities at once. Yep. I'm not alone in this, but...
Yeah, it's like a freelancer.
Yeah, it's like freelancing, and then all of a sudden a tenure track position in my very field is opening up. I think I stand a pretty good chance. I'd already won a teaching award at University of Guelph. I was publishing well. I'd been to Harvard, and things were looking good. So the union said, look, he's got so much seniority here, you have to, according to the collective agreement, you have to shortlist him, you have to interview him. And they requested the emails of the dean and associate dean and others and whatnot, and those clearly indicated that, yeah, they had to. It was protocol. It was part of the bargaining collective agreement. So they knew kind of the jig was up. So, what do? Well, they cut you a check for a nominal amount. And
so it was a settlement?
A settlement.
So there was never an admission of anybody was in the wrong. It was just a settlement. And,
that's it.
Do you mind saying how much it was? Or
well, I can't disclose that because of a gag order.
You got a non-disclosure agreement?
But I would have preferred a position. It was not a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately the non-disclosure agreement that you have with them and the fact that they never admitted guilt means that you don't ever get a chance to actually defend yourself to these people, because there was, in one of the articles I read, said that there was some improper sexual language that you used in a course. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So we were talking about sexual selection in evolutionary theory, and we got onto the discussion of homosexuality. And so I stated, look, I don't know what your views are about homosexuality. I don't know what you folks have learned in your lives about homosexuality, but it appears overwhelmingly that there's a large biological factor, which means it's not something you simply choose. It's not like fashion. It's more like eye color. It's part of who you are. So for any religion to say it's a sin to be a homosexual is out of touch with scientific fact. And so if anyone in your family, if you are gay, you're homosexual, there's nothing wrong with you. Where there's wrongness are in ethical systems that maintain that it's a choice, and clearly a choice. Well, why wouldn't Alan Turing and Oscar Wilde and all of these people throughout history, why wouldn't they just have chosen not to be gay?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, clearly there's a strong biological component, and I think the fundamentalist Christians took issue with that.
There's always been pushback against people teaching science, especially evolution, that goes against their religious beliefs.
Right.
So why do you think that they chose to single you out? You're not clearly you're not the first scientist to say we came from Africa and that we have a common ancestry, and it's certainly not an offensive thing to say unless you're a racist who doesn't want to be associated that way. So
Right.
why do you think this specifically? Do you have any theories? Because you've had time.
I
you've had
know.
20 years
I've had 20 years
to sort of try to figure this one out.
I think it was the very start of a kind of a cancel culture within academia where students were being treated more as clients, and they didn't want to upset the apple cart too much. And so when they sided more with the students than with the professor, that was my first experience. That was a real wake-up call for me to realize, how far are they willing to go with this? Like, as I said, I'm the messenger. I'm not bright enough to come up with the scientific evidence, but I am a good compiler of evidence to be able to then spread the word and to let people know, that I can read through this stuff and I can make it fairly understandable to others. Mm-hmm. That's your job as an educator.
You're in a critical thinking class. That's where you're supposed to be challenging these things. If you go into study critical thinking, you have to assume you're not going in there with a preconceived idea about things. You're trying to learn how to think critically. And that's why I'm just curious why specifically a course like this, if you were teaching religious sensitivity and ultimately...
Or what if I were teaching accounting and I just started writing "We Are All African"? Yeah. Well, what does that have to do? What does that have to do with debits and credits and, this kind of stuff? But it was a course in critical thinking.
Yeah, and this is why I'm curious. And then the fact that they canceled the whole course, could this have been like some kind of thing that they thought, oh, we're opening up a can of worms with a course like this?
Maybe.
And you may have just been the guy who made them aware of this. But that's an unfortunate thing for you because it's impacted your career ever since.
It had. Oh, there's no question.
How has that happened?
Yeah, so I realized if those 4 words can have that kind of effect on a handful of students at a university level, how's the rest of the world going to respond to this? So I thought, well, I'm not going to stop. I'm going to take this to the people. I'm going to take this to the streets. And I thought, I'm going to create a shirt and I'm going to put "We're All African" on it, and I'm going to unveil it at a conference I was speaking at that summer. And so there's a picture here of me wearing that shirt outside of the Alamo in San Antonio, Texas. And my brother Mark said, "What are you doing?" And I said, well, philosophers, I think, have a responsibility to be involved outside of the classroom. Philosophy doesn't stop when you leave the classroom. It's a part of your life. And if we can't carry on this dialogue with the rest of the world, with anybody on the streets, what are we doing? Are we just kind of cloistered away in the hallowed halls of academia and teaching a handful of students? No. I think we have a duty and an obligation as educators to continue that outside, to keep the conversation going. And he said, yeah, but you're going to do this in Texas. And I said, yeah. And he said, what good is a dead philosopher? Because they're not going to take to this too kindly.
Was there somehow some misunderstanding of what your shirt, was it sort of taken by some people that you were trivializing the plight of minority groups who
No.
you'd never got into that sort of thing?
No, it was in Texas. I had several responses, right? I had a few eye rolls and the odd, humph, and but African American woman walked right up to me and said, "Where'd you get the shirt?" I said, "Well, I made it." "You made it? Why? What happened?" And I told her my story, and she said, "I would buy that. I would wear that." You're right. Of course, you're right. That's exactly, and that's how we battle racism.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, ultimately,
And so
I think that was your objective, is to say, we all have the same DNA.
That's
we
it.
all have common ancestor, and this is meant as a way to break down barriers.
That's exactly it. Through science. We can actually scientifically demonstrate to people that racism has to be a part of an indoctrination amongst groups. It has to be.
It's a construct.
Now,
some sort.
all of us, all humans, like all mammals, are inherently xenophobic, which is to fear foreignness, to fear that which doesn't belong to our group. That's a survival instinct. You saw chipmunks earlier today running around my backyard. You and I go out there with a bag of peanuts. We know by the end of the afternoon they're sitting on our knee and taking peanuts from our hands. Why? Because they can learn to overcome their fear of us to gain sustenance, to gain food. And once they realize we're not a threat, their fear of us goes down. We're the same with every other animal and every other human. As long as, originally, if you could imagine, Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal and other hominins had to worry, is this group in the distance friend or foe? They have no idea.
Anyone who's different.
Anyone.
They look different. They're just not from
They're just not from the group. So it's a natural human tendency to be wary at first, and then once you realize that there's a lack of threat, then that fear subsides, and then, right?
Especially when it comes to something like as simple as skin tone.
That's it.
Which is, it's such a superficial thing.
It is. When I saw the reaction I got from wearing the shirt, I commissioned a local artist to create these. So I have a number of different styles of this kind of We Are All African shirt. And at the same time, Dr. Anne-Marie Zadlik was raising funds with her Bracelet of Hope campaign. And we met and we talked about what I had gone through. And so at all my public lectures and book tours and anything like that, I would always sell bracelets and give a percentage of proceeds from the shirts and posters to the Sepong AIDS clinic in Lesotho, Africa. So, and she's a Christian woman, and knowing that I was an atheist, it didn't matter to her.
No.
We had a common goal, which is for the betterment of others. I often, when I give lectures, talk, and especially critical thinking, the distinguishing of how difficult it is for humans to separate their limbic system or their emotional center of their brains from their prefrontal cortex or the more intellectual parts of their brains. In fact, that's one of the most difficult things to do in critical thinking because it requires fairness. You have to pull yourself back from your emotions to try to just deal with the evidence and deal with arguments and deal with structure and facts. And what I think was going on at an underlying level is when I said we're all African, that brings in evolutionary theory. And then what that means is that humans are another ape. We're another African ape. And I think for some people, that's too much. We were specially created. We are a divinity's greatest creation. To call us just another ape is to diminish us and to, keep us down. And I'm sorry that in some people's eyes that diminishes them.
I know you got a lot of support in the humanist community and academics.
Yeah.
And what's the response from them?
Yeah, some of the people in the secular and humanist and atheist societies, man, they came through big time. People like Dr. Richard Thane and Dr. Larry Moran and Simon Parcher and Kathy Demoo. They rallied around me. Henry Morgenthaler, when he found out about it, he couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
And so Dr. Morgenthaler supported me for the rest of my career until his death, because he couldn't believe it was happening.
Well, that's
at
an
a
interesting
university.
thing, you know, there's pushback, but it didn't seem to influence the administrators at the university.
In fact, they've gotten so much worse. Like I think I'm
Yeah.
one of the first professors to get canceled simply by teaching what is acceptable in the scientific communities. And it's funny, you're never fired, you're just kind of nudged out. The positions go away, and then they say, well, you know, if it weren't for that, you know, but we've decided
But
not.
you think this was a very deliberate thing?
Oh, there's no question.
Obviously, they settled, so
There's no question.
they got their lawyers said, you know, they'll give you a bunch of money if you shut up.
Yeah, make them go
basically.
away.
And
Make them go away.
and so there's no liability on their side.
But that's it. As soon as that happens, every university finds out.
Yeah,
And the next time you apply, right, they might throw you a course or two, and then they'll keep their eye on you. And if you act a little you color outside of the lines, that's, you know, one more reason. So that was one of the first dismissals, I guess, for lack of a better word. But yeah, the humanist community rallied around, which was good. But something weird happened 5 years later. So I'd written these articles, and articles have been written about me, and We Are All African had become kind of synonymous with, you know, my plight as a secular
yeah, you became
atheist.
kind of like a martyr of this whole humanist movement.
Yeah, and I was touring and writing magazine articles. And then there was a big conference in LA in 2010, and all the superstars were there. I think the only two that weren't there was Dan Dennett and Christopher Hitchens. But all the luminaries were there, Sam Harris and Dawkins, and, you know, all of them, they were all there. And I talked to one of the organizers, and he said, hey, do you want to come out to this thing? Do you want to present your latest research? And I said, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm packing my We're All African shirts and posters as we speak. And the next email was all caps, do not bring any We Are All African merchandise. Okay. Why? Is there an issue? I just don't think there will be room on the merch table for it. Okay. All right. I brought some anyhow because that seemed like such a weird thing to say. I mean, there's no room, just get another table. Like, it just seems so weird. And this was a gentleman whom I worked with very high up in the U.S. secular community. So my family and I show up in LA, and we're walking around, and I meet a very good friend of mine, a very well-known woman in the secular community. And she said, did you hear about the Richard Dawkins Foundation? I said, no, what? They're using your idea. I said, what? Yeah, they like the We're All African thing. I said, I had no idea. What do you mean? What's going on? Oh, you should talk to Richard. You should talk to Richard. Oh, okay, sure. You know. So I meet Richard Dawkins, and I had known him for years. And I said, Richard, what's going on? And he had just received what looked like a kind of a parcel in the mail, and he pulled out a shirt, and the shirt said, "We are all Africans." And the A,
Yes, yeah.
and the A was the red atheist A.
Oh.
And I said, what's going on, Richard? And he goes, oh, this is our latest merch for the Richard Dawkins Foundation. I said, you know I got fired for that, right? And he goes, no. I said, Richard, it's literally in the magazine you're holding. Look at the cover. You know, We Are All African by yours truly. How did you guys not know about this? And so he was surprised to hear, apparently, that I had gotten fired, even though this was 5 years later. I'm sure it was well known within the secular community, but it's possible he didn't know about it.
Right.
So I thought, okay, well, I'll touch base with you again after the conference. And he said, do that, reach out, okay. So we got back home and I called the Richard Dawkins Foundation, which I think was in New York at that time, and left a message, no response. Called back again a few days later, left a message, no response. Disguised my number, called. The CEO or the executive director picks up. This is a woman. Don't know if I can mention her name or not, but
It's up to you.
I'm sure you can figure out, people can go back in time and figure out who it was. And she said, hello, and I said, hi, it's Dr. Christopher DiCarlo. Oh, you. Hello? What do you want? What do I want? I'm supposed to touch base again with Richard, you know, the whole "we're all African" thing. You don't own that phrase. I said, no, nobody owns the phrase. That's not what this is about.
The sky is blue.
Yeah. I said, no, we were supposed to talk about the ordeal that I've gone through and how it's damaged my career. She said, I don't know anything about that, and if you have an issue with it, get a lawyer. Click.
So that do they have the copyright on that phrase or something?
No, nobody does.
Right.
I guess you could register trademark it, I suppose, but I just never thought.
Maybe with the or the atheist A or whatever.
Oh, who knows?
I don't know. Like, I mean, if it's a graphic of some sort.
But I just thought it was so curt and so dismissive that this woman would just not have anything to do with me whatsoever. And I thought, wow. And a few years earlier, Michael Shermer was giving a talk in Toronto, and I was invited to come down and meet him and go to the talk. And I gave him one of these "We're All African" shirts. And he said, oh, this is great. This is wonderful. Thank you very much. Oh, I like this. I really appreciate this. And we've stayed in contact back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But just to let you know how much these 4 words were associated with my career and what I had gone through, when the Black Lives Matter movement was happening, right, in 2020 and 2021, Shermer contacts me in an email with Dawkins' "We Are All Africans" shirt and says, do I dare wear it now? And I had to write back to him and say, that's not the shirt I gave you. That's one of Richard's.
Oh, he had one of his too.
And I sent him this. And I said, yes. So he associated it with me, even though it was, even though it came from,
It's a business. The decision made to fire you was a business decision.
It was.
And
it was.
And this is, again, it's a, I know you're a fan of Richard Dawkins.
Yeah.
But you also, it I guess illustrates how the business end of these things take off and become, that's why I say it. It's not a contentious thing to say.
No.
And it hasn't been for decades. The fact that you've gone through all this, and then of course for them to just act like it didn't happen, especially when she knows exactly
full well
why you're calling.
Exactly.
She's cutting you short.
And that the organizer at this conference said, don't bring any of your stuff because
he knows it's going
to interfere with what they were planning 5 years after the fact. And that they put an S at the end, and
clear means that they knew that they had to change it.
They had to change it.
So it didn't associate consistently.
But then to put the red letter A in front of the word Africans, I think that's a little offensive.
Yeah, I do too. Because ultimately that they're not all atheists.
No.
And the letter A, the big letter A, it stood for a few things over the years.
It did. The Scarlet Letter.
Scarlet Letter, and anarchy, and
yes.
The anarchists use a big red A.
They do.
And, so I mean.
And this is 5 years after I had gone through all of this, and at that time I had just been fired from my latest university, and was out of a job.
And you were fired
for being an atheist. That one went to the Human Rights Tribunal, right, of Ontario.
And that was UT?
Or
some other southwestern university?
Yeah, another Southern Ontario university, yeah. But people can look that up. I mean, it's DiCarlo so anybody can have access if they want to look at the court the records behind that. But we were poor, like struggling, going further and further and further into debt. And it just would have been nice for a secularist or a humanist, like with the power of Dawkins and his foundation, to say, this guy got fired for saying this. You know, not that he has to give me any money, not that he has to do anything, but just to simply acknowledge, you know, as a casualty of the culture war, if you like, that this guy's really suffered. So yeah, the public really doesn't know about that.
And here you are, like you say, 20
story.
years later, and it is interesting because, you know, Dawkins he's a celebrity scientist.
He's a rock star.
He's not hurting for cash.
Yeah, so that left a bit of a bad taste in my mouth. But the others who rallied around me, I mean, and I did a We're All African tour. I went across Canada and down into the States, met with the VP of the NAACP. You know, there was a lot of good that came out of it.
I guess I guess coming back to that question, 20 years later, and you've had time to sort of, I guess, ruminate on the experience. And
would I have done it all over again? Like, if I could go back in time, would I just not have written it on the board? I don't know. Like, I've often said to myself, the next T-shirt I make is "Get the tenure first," because you know, my supervisor Michael Roos was a great. He helped invent philosophy of biology. He was the first evolutionist that I really studied under, to bring philosophy and science together. And if I had known when he introduced me to some of the humanist groups, and I was giving talks and becoming better known as a secularist, if I had known how damaging that would have been to my career, I might never have admitted ever that I was an atheist until the second after I was granted tenure.
Yeah, well, there's a lesson to be learned here about how business basically is the guiding factor of everything. In this, you know, and that's not a diatribe against capitalism.
No.
But I mean, it ultimately speaks to how that's been a guiding principle. But
it takes the expertise out of the professional academics and puts it into the hands of HR to make decisions. And it's
this
like,
is a problem with, you know,
who are the experts here? And like, you teach the students. You don't have the students tell you what they get to learn and how they get to learn it. They're there to learn. And they're there to be pushed, and they're there to have their minds expanded and to be challenged
in their views, so that they have to learn how to present an argument about their belief.
And to mature as a human being, and to become a civilian, you know, to know how to live civically then in a pluralistic society. But that's broken down, and I'm afraid I think I was one of the first casualties, at least in Canada. And the irony, right? Like,
I know, this is
another
be a critical thinking course, and
right?
That's the one that gets canceled.
I thought I made up another T-shirt. I went online. They actually sell this T-shirt. It's called "I Am Irony Man." You know the Black Sabbath song, "I Am Iron Man." I am Irony Man. And the irony of hiring a professor of philosophy to teach, you know, people how to think, students how to think, and then to get rid of the very person who's trying to teach them how to think, because a couple of them, 3 of them, took offense. Like, and today, like I've mentioned to friends and colleagues, I don't know if I'd make it to lunch if I were hired at a university today before somebody complained.
As long as you, like they say, it's get tenure first.
Yeah.